I declare this meeting of the Planning Committee for the City of Port Phillip Council open, and I welcome the members of the public who are here tonight. Great crowd. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willam clan and of the Bunwurrung. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and we acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship with this land. Council has a local law that determines how this meeting is to be conducted. There is a time allotted in tonight's agenda for public question time. There's also an opportunity for members of the public to ask a question or make a comment on a specific item on tonight's agenda, and this will be done prior to the committee considering that item. If you wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form that's available at the table just outside the chamber and hand it to a staff member. And I'll encourage you to try and limit your questions to 3 minutes. I don't think we're going to have overload here, so we'll see how long it takes. To try and avoid repeating any points that have been previously made by other speakers. Please note that this committee can only address questions and deal with items within its delegation, that is, planning matters. Please note also that all planning committee meetings are now being live streamed, so there may be an audience out there. Live streaming and recording allows the community to watch and listen to meetings in real time. Please also note that in accordance with Council's local law, that this meeting cannot be filmed or audio taped unless permission is granted by the Chair. In the unlikely event of an emergency evacuation, please follow the instructions of the Chief Warden, who is one of us. Rebecca. Okay. Apologies. Do we have any apologies? Who was it?
I'm not sitting next to you,
Sorry.
Is that my job tonight?
Yeah, the old man's disease. Councillor Voss.
Councillor Voss. Can I have a mover and a seconder for that apology?
I'll second.
Councillor Gross, Councillor Bond. Be received and leave of absence granted. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Minutes of previous meetings. Councillors, the minutes of the Planning Committee meeting held on the 22nd of May 2019 have been circulated. Are there any questions regarding these minutes?
Happy to move.
Can we have a motion? Councillor Gross.
Second.
Seconded.
Yeah.
Councillor Pearl. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Oh, that was a late vote. But it was a pro vote. Declarations of conflict of interest. Does any councillor have a conflict of interest in a matter being discussed at tonight's meeting? Nope. Public question time. Councillors, there are no people who have requested to ask a question tonight, so we won't be proceeding with that. Councillor question time. Councillors, are there any questions for the officers? Nope. Presentation of reports. See the separate attachment. Here we are. Okay. I'll now move the presentation to the presentation of reports. Items 6.1 to 6.3. We start with. Oh, hold on. That can't be right. That's the minutes. I need the running sheet. Sorry. There we are. Item 6.1 is 14 Orange Grove, Balaclava. Do we have anybody from the public to speak on that? We do. Rob Harris, who is the applicant. Please step forward to the microphone. Sit in front of it, and for the record, just say your name. Press the button so it goes on. The light will go on red, and just say your name and suburb for the record, and then
Sure. My name is Rob Harris. Suburb is Caulfield South.
thank you. Off you go. Tell us what you got.
Well, a notice of decision has already been issued. I just wanted to, I suppose, point out or reiterate that our original proposal of a 6-bedroom house has come down to a 4-bedroom home in response to the objectors, the 16 objectors that were objecting. So I just wanted to point that out as the first thing. And just as Councillor Gross said before, say that I'm open to any questions that you might have on this. That was really it.
Okay, it's very short. That's the shortest talk that we've had, and it's much apprecited.
Thanks.
And I'm happy to move.
But are there any questions that we have for Mr. Harris that we want to ask him, or no?
I'll talk about that in my...
Well, have we got questions we want to ask officers? No? Nobody? This is going very quickly. So we go straight to the motion. We will have a mover in Councillor Gross. What are you moving?
Officers' rec.
The officer's recommendation. Have we got a seconder? Councillor Bond. Would you like to speak to it? Councillor
Yes,
Gross?
look, this...
Mr. Harris, you don't have to. You're welcome to sit there, but you don't have to sit there. We've done that bit. Thank you very much.
So I just want to say to the applicant and his representative, or the landowner and the applicant, that I sort of regret that this has gone so long and come so far. We had a very successful consultation on this. It was quite clear that this is an application that's consistent with the planning scheme, and it shouldn't have come this far, and it should have been approved some time ago, and I regret the delay.
Councillor Bond, seconding it? No? Yes? No?
I'll second it, but not
Okay.
speaking.
Councillor Gross, I don't think you have a right to reply because there's nothing to reply to. So we're going to go straight to the motion. All those in favour? All those against? Passed unanimously. Marvellous. Okay. Item 6.2, which is 195 to 199 Ferrars Street, South Melbourne. We have one person coming to speak, and that is Simon Gilbertson, who is speaking for the applicant. Welcome. Just turn the mic on, say your name and suburb, and let forth.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Simon Gilbertson from Richmond, but I work at Contour Consultants. We're the town planning consultants representing the permit applicant, who is arriving shortly. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in favour of the proposed development here this evening. As you're aware, this is quite a unique and interesting site within the municipality. It's got 2 main road frontages. It's commercially one zone. We don't have residential interfaces. It's clearly underutilised at the moment, so it represents a really interesting and unique opportunity to create and enhance the character of this area. We've taken the opportunity to read the council officer's thorough report. We do oppose the imposition of Condition 1A, which seeks the reduction of the overall development by 1 storey. This is an application that has been through a thorough process. The original application started at a 10-storey proposal, predominantly residential, and is now before you as a 7-storey commercial office and retail development. It won't impose amenity impacts by way of overshadowing to any residential properties. It will clearly, through our reading of the council urban design comments, be a high quality insertion into this part of South Melbourne, and we think will be an attractive proposition for businesses to locate in this area. If I turn then to some of the key issues that have sort of faced this application, and although it does represent a unique opportunity, there have been challenges along the way, and has informed in part what's before you, including a significant reduction in scale from the 10 to 7 storeys. But when we think about our nearby landowners, one of them is a state government authority in VicTrack, and we've been dealing with VicTrack through this application process as they initially raised some concerns with the proposal. We're happy to say that we're at a point where they do not object to the proposal subject to conditions. Part of the discussion with VicTrack was a concern around the glazing located on the shared property boundary. Part of that is around people or a worry about people throwing things onto railway tracks, a legitimate concern. So through the project team in discussion with VicTrack, we have come up with a solution which has manifested itself in the recommended condition 1B in the officer recommendation. And what that condition will allow our client to do is have part of the building on the shared boundary with VicTrack. So, for example, we can locate our lift core and services and things along that boundary that don't need windows. But where we do propose windows to that boundary, they need to be set back 1 metre. So there's a need for us to resolve plans through that condition that need to satisfy and provide that separation from the VicTrack land, and that's a condition that our client is accepting of. So we think that the incorporation of that condition does result in a loss of floor area to what we see as a non-sensitive interface for us, but in overall terms will result in a good outcome and a high quality amenity outcome for the future users of that building. I'll try and keep it brief, but if I turn to some of the other issues, there is a significant reduction in car parking sought for this site. It is quite constrained in its dimensions. There are limitations to the amount of access and car parking that we can provide, but there are 29 bike spaces, end of trip facilities, and we're right next to the tram line. This is a site where we are encouraging people to use sustainable forms of transport. So when I look at this insertion of and the expression of masonry, a large extent of masonry, rather than the typical glazed boxes that we see in other parts of the town, I think that this is one that is really going to set the bar for other developments in this area, and we encourage the council to support the proposal in its advertised form at the 7-storey height. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have in relation to the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We might get some questions from some councillors.
This doesn't really pertain
Councillor
to
Pearl.
what's contained in this document, so you don't have to answer this question, but is the intention for this building to be built? There's obviously been a big change from the original application to this application. I'm just wondering, does your customer actually intend to build the building?
They certainly do. This is a client that we do a number of projects with, and those projects get built.
Councillor, any other questions from councillors? No, I've got some, but sorry, anybody? I've got a question. I still am struggling to understand the situation with the windows on the eastern boundary, and there's been some interest amongst councillors about why we would be wanting to end up with a blank, basically a largely blank facade, but maybe we've misunderstood something. Can you just re-explain? Can we have a look at can we get an image up here of the eastern facade proposed? No. The question, it seems to me you're intending to build on the boundary. There are windows all on the advertised proposal, all except for where the lift cores are. There are windows on all floors, spreading around on the boundary, all fixed windows that you can't throw anything out of. And then there is a further proposal that you've come up with to set some windows back 1 metre with the little curvy thing and form a balcony, which you can throw things off, in certain parts, but all of the rest of the walls are going to be no windows? Or do you think they're going to have windows?
It will depend is the short response. The starting position was, our clear preference is expressed in the advertised plans. We want windows on that boundary. It provides outlook and amenity for the future occupants of the building. VicTrac's quite right starting position is one of preservation for their interests. And so the starting position was really for no windows to be located into that elevation, to that east elevation. We pushed quite hard through discussions and through a process of VicTrac to work out a solution whereby a condition could be formulated so that we could have windows on that east elevation. Now, in order to do that and in order to reach a form of agreement, let's say, required a setback from the property boundary. As you can see from the dimensions of the site, 1 metre makes a significant difference in floor area terms for this proposal if you were to take a complete 1 metre along that eastern elevation. So in trying to incorporate a 1 metre setback and get those windows in, we are still looking to try and preserve floor area within the building where it's not impacting anybody. So there is a balance there to be had. We know from daylight modelling that has been done that that the daylight within this building, due to its orientation and its dimensions, will be far in excess of the standard. So it will be a high quality space for future workers. But the flexibility within the condition, and this is where the discussions with VicRoads allowed the wording of the condition that sits in the officer's recommendation, will enable our client and the architects to explore how to get as much glazing into the building while retaining as much floor area as possible. So while it may seem a discrete difference, if you like, between why can't it all be windows like the advertised plans, that makes a significant difference to the overall floor area of the building. And when in combination, council may recommend to remove an additional floor, it starts to undermine the overall building.
My question wasn't exactly that. It's that my question is, if VicTrac's problem was people throwing things out windows, wouldn't their problem been solved if you guaranteed that the windows would be fixed?
It wasn't just about throwing out and light spill in proximity to the railway tram tracks if it was on boundary. Now, I don't know what the science is that enabled VicTrac to say that 1 metre is the right number, but that is a position that our client is comfortable to live with in order to be able to facilitate windows within the building to that facade.
I'm going to come back with some questions, but at the moment, Councillor Crawford, you ask a question.
So can I ask then, so your client is happy to accept the wording that is in the current recommendation around that, which is 1B for that boundary? Your client's very happy because it's something, those words will allow them to work to get the best outcome you can.
Yeah, that's right. That enables us to try and, if you like, minimise the walls on boundary that we can and maximise the amount of glazing rather than VicTrac saying, for example, we only want a window here. So this provides us the flexibility to try and maximise it rather than confining it to only having, bits and pieces.
I'm just going to intervene and then ask a further question on the same topic. So on this concept design here, the only place that you'd have windows on the eastern facade is in part of those areas which you've shaded black.
On that sketch plan, that's right. As was shown in that package, it's that sort of sculpted form similar to the Ferrars Street elevation. But again, the wording of the condition will enable us. As you can see, that's a hand sketch that was done to demonstrate how it might be incorporated, but through the endorsement of plans, and again, the flexibility that that condition provides, enables us to revisit that and the extent of the glazing to try and incorporate as much as we can for the future users of that building. You know, the important thing is that the condition doesn't set a maximum. You know, it doesn't try and restrict us in terms of the amount of glazing. It leaves it to us and the architect to be able to come up to a design to actually incorporate it in, and we see that as a positive.
I've got to ask, on the basis that there has been some discussion amongst council about whether we actually want a wall, a building with a very visible large wall with so little fenestration in it. Would it affect you in any way badly if we deleted that clause, that condition?
I'd be happy if we got the wall on the boundary with the glazing. Our client would be happy with that outcome. But ultimately, we're not a state government authority, and we abide by those. We understand their role in the planning system, and I think that having been through the discussions over some time with VicTrack, that the outcome that is reflected in the recommended condition is probably about the right balance.
Any other questions from councillors? I've got another one myself. I just want to ask you about the seventh story, which is really the fifth floor taken out. In what way does the imposition of a condition to take a floor out, short of just reducing the profit of the developer, just as limiting it to that effect, what if any effect does it have on the benefits or the quality of the building in terms of the public interest? The public interest is not particularly interested in the developer making more or less money, but I'm just wondering if it has any ramifications if that floor is taken out that could be felt at the public interest level.
Excuse me. I think it does have an impact. It certainly has an impact in terms of its perception from the street, and the proportions of the building are important, are relevant to a site and its context. And I do think that the deletion of an additional floor level, and in this case let's call it one of the main sized floor plates, will have an impact on the presentation of this building to the public realm. So I do think it has an impact. It is not, as you say, just a profit grab. There is an exercise and a design exercise about what is right for a particular site and its context. And certainly at 7 stories, we feel that it will contribute very positively to this site and its context.
Do we have any further questions for the? Thank you very much for that. Okay, can we have a motion, Councillor? Oh, sorry, you have to do questions for officers. Forgot about that. Yes, I've got a question for officers too, but somebody else have a go. Councillor Gross?
Dick. Just wanted to... Okay, VicTrack have sent a last late-breaking newsletter, and they have some questions about the critical windows on the rail corridor, and I just wondered what your advice would be about the development interface guidelines that the department are about to release, and if you're not aware of those guidelines, do you have any advice about how we should proceed tonight on this decision? So if I can read it to you. VicTrack is close to releasing development interface guidelines that provide guidance around developing adjacent to rail. One of the key principles of these new guidelines is that the new development should not include windows, terraces and opening directly on the boundary of the rail corridor. This can affect existing and proposed infrastructure safety. It also constrains the rail corridor as enabling development then relies on the rail corridor for its light and air. So much in the same way as a private property owner would not have a large window on his neighbour's boundary, we do not support openings that would constrain the rail corridor. So we insist that there be no windows on the boundary or within 1 metre.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm not familiar with those controls nor that email, Councillor Gross. However,
I just received it half an hour ago.
Okay, so I would have to say the way it's been expressed by the applicant today seems to satisfy those requirements.
Okay.
So I think the design principles are in there and probably the precursor to some of the discussions that have been had.
Great. Thanks very much. I mean, Katie Craft, the woman who wrote it, who used to work here, said, we've discussed these issues with the applicant's consultant Contour and they respect and support our position.
Can you just, what were the detrimental things that they were guarding against? I just didn't hear you say it properly.
One of the key principles of these new guidelines is that the new development should not include windows, terraces and openings directly onto the boundary of the corridor. This can affect existing and proposed infrastructure, safety and also constrains the rail corridor as neighbouring development then relies on the rail corridor for its light and air.
Right, so they don't give any reason. They just say.
Not really. It's more of an assertion that these openings would somehow constrain the VicTrack's use and enjoyment of rights over the rail corridor. Sorry, I just got this.
Councillor Pearl.
Thanks very much. As we see more of these developments take place, I'm wondering about the management of the... Don't get asked that very often. I'm wondering about the management of the adjacency between the building and the railway track. There was a fire on this... on the building, so against the building with the garbage that had built up from the railway track or the tram track on the side of the building about 6 or 7 weeks ago. I don't know if the applicant is aware of that, but the two fire brigade units were called out there and that was extinguished. I don't know how it started, but there was a lot of accelerant there in terms of just garbage and also leaves from the trees there, etc. Who's, in terms of fire management practices, who's responsible for the interface of the building between the building and the railway track?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'll answer that. I would say both parties are responsible for keeping their premises in a tidy state. So you'll see that there'll be a pretty thick wall on this side of this boundary, but you'd assume that VicTrack will then keep it in a better state. And you'd have to think that with development nearby, there's likely to be more concerns raised by the users of the office space with VicTrack if it was looking untidy or unkept.
And through you, Mr. Chair, there's also conditions on permit through VicTrack's objection that talks about the boundary and having a fence and access into their land. So there's some tighter conditions in regards to their boundary and VicTrack's boundary as well.
So can I ask this officer, there's a whole series of VicTrack conditions already proposed through to condition 13. Do you understand that? Are there any other detriments that you could? I'm really just trying to get my head around what the problem for VicTrack is. Are there any other detriments that aren't covered by those conditions? That a condition of just barring all windows on the boundary would actually benefit VicTrack from it? It hasn't been covered in all these other conditions of light, spill. I don't know them all off by heart. There's so many of them.
Through you, Mr Chair, they're just protecting themselves, they're protecting their land, they're protecting, it's my understanding, light spillage and anything thrown from those windows to the tram tracks. I think it's pretty covered in the proposed conditions, and there's nothing else that we could add.
Any other questions from councillors? I've got a question for another officer. Where does my basic feeling is that I think that the city should be unhappy with another authority insisting that a 7-storey edifice in this city be virtually windowless. That's your question. The question is, what can we do about it without actually? I also feel sensitive about sort of overruling them without understanding better what their real concerns are.
Through to you, Mr. Chairman, rather than through you. Well, it's unclear. What's come to us through this application is obviously a precursor to some other policy that they wish to do. At the moment, the role of VicTrack in this application is only a neighbour. It's not a referral authority. It doesn't have the strength of a referral, so it doesn't then, tell you that you can or cannot do conditions. So they are a neighbour, and they've provided some commentary to the applicant. They're a much stronger neighbour than most instances because they're part of the Victorian government, trying to protect their asset and try to protect their operations of their business. So that's the role they're playing here. They've put conditions on. They've requested conditions. We put the conditions on. I think we've covered all their requirements in this instance. If there is a policy, we would respect that, and if it gets greater standing into the planning scheme, that might be a mandatory consideration. At this point, it is a condition we're putting on permit through negotiations with the applicant and VicTrack. So yes, we can change that condition if we don't like it. We can delete that condition if we don't like it. However, it will make it difficult for the applicant. And remembering, as the applicants put, is that council has final say on the plans. So the plans do need to be to our satisfaction. So we can certainly work with the applicant in relation to the final product.
If I was of a mind to test the waters on deferring it, to actually go have a discussion with VicTrack on it, is that practical? But that's not. I'm not asking you. I'm not asking you. I'm asking you about the ramifications, that timing-wise.
Through you, Mr Chair, this is before VCAT. We go to VCAT for a compulsory conference on the 10th of July, and this is our report is our position going into the compulsory conference. So timing is quite vital now, and we have a position that we need to go to in regards to the 10th of July.
Is VicRail a party to the hearing?
Through you, Mr Chair, VicTrack aren't a party to the appeal. We have one objector who is a local resident. However, they don't wish to be heard. Their objection is dealt with on the papers.
Can I add to that, Mr Chairman, that if VicTrack's absence from the hearing really indicates that they're satisfied with the process and the process they've dealt with the applicant on, and I'm comfortable they'd be satisfied with these conditions.
So if we deleted the condition, would they have any recourse?
they would have to make themselves party to the hearing and seek to be joined.
They could do that.
They could do that, yes.
Any other questions to officers? Anybody want to move a motion?
I'll move the officers.
Well, hold on. I'm afraid Councillor Crawford has flagged that she's going to move an alternative rec. Foreshadowed?
Moving it now, aren't
All
I?
right.
Is that all right?
You're moving. Dick's foreshadowed the councillor's thing of... He hasn't. Okay. Councillor Crawford, move.
So I'd like to adjust a couple of conditions. Is to, on 1A, to delete that condition. Is it up there?
1A.
Yeah.
You got it right there.
Yeah, got it. Just waiting for it to come up. I'm not going to do it, David. I'm going to leave the big track in. They've done a go version. Is it? Yeah. It's not quite that alternative motion. I'd like to leave condition B in. And then if we go to 44, I don't know how it's up there. 44. To adjust the car parking allocation, that one car space must be allocated to the food and drinks premises. Yep, that's correct. And also to adjust 45, the ongoing involvement of the architect. That's correct up there. Yep.
And 45. And 45. Yep, 44 and 45.
That's the extent of the amendment, or the alternate motion from...
Can we have a seconder, please?
It doesn't look like I'm going to have a seconder anyway, Murray. Is anyone going to second me? Oh.
Yeah, I'll second you if you, for the sake of...
So the others, apparently one more adjustment, sorry, that I missed in the actual... which one,
on.
Murray? Sorry, I can't... It's
want to
condition 1I, one on-site car space to be allocated to the food and drinks premises. Sorry, it was earlier in the piece as well.
I can't second it and move an emotion. and
It's
move an
actually on the
amendment.
second page. Over. It's up on the front. Yeah.
I offered to second it, so I suppose that's seconding, isn't it? Well, I offered to second it. Well, Dick, I'll give it to Councillor Gross to second that. Councillor Crawford.
After hearing the applicant discuss the extensive conversations that he's had with, or that has been had with VicTrack, I think it would actually be very remiss of us to remove that condition, given that there are obviously reasons for it and practicalities that we are not aware of. And it would just extend the process if they have to come back and ask for any exceptions. I'm also fine to have another level. But I do, having worked in food and beverage, do think that on an on-site, one car space is essential for a business to be able to operate. So that's my particular sticking point. Other than that, I think the building's beautiful and I look forward to seeing it in our municipality.
Councillor Gross. Councillor, anyone else? Councillor Bond.
Yeah, I'd like to move an amendment that we also strike out condition B with, which pertains to the windows. 1B, sorry, that pertains to the windows.
Seconded by...
Look, what this does is it doesn't say yes or no to any of the windows. It just means that we're not mandating that there be no windows on this site. The negotiation between the applicant and VicTrack and VCATS can still take place. Personally, my preference would be, I like the plans that we've put in front of us. I'd like there to be windows along this. I think the passive surveillance of that particular parcel of land would be good. It'll give the people inside something to look at. They can look at the trams go past, and the people on the trams can look at the people inside doing their work. So they can each look at each other. So I think I think this would be a much better building if we had windows along this side, as per the plans that have been presented to us. But I also think that if the applicant's happy with VicTrack's conditions, they can negotiate that at VCAT, and if not, they can request that these windows be kept in. All we are doing is remaining silent on that by removing this condition. We're not mandating these windows are removed.
Councillor, any further comment on that? Second.
I don't wish to speak at all, so if there's no further speakers, we could probably put them.
All right, I'm going to speak, if everybody else has had a go on this amendment. I support that amendment, this amendment 2. I think for the city's interests, it is, for both this and in other cases in the future, I think it's in the city's interest not to accede to a desire like this to actually... It's a very large building on a railway line. It's an unusual situation, but it'll be much more usual in the future, and I think it's a bad precedent to set to just say there shall be no windows on the boundary of a railway reserve. And it's certainly in the interest of this city to make this as presentable a building as possible, and to make it as functional a building as possible actually to the inhabitants as well. I think that it's, as we go into VCAT on this, it's a position that council should take. It is council's interest that windows are in this facade as first designed, a beautiful design, and it's definitely in council's interest that those windows should remain there. It's possible that council's interest could be overridden by a strong case and a strong explanation from VicTrack about exactly what the detriment would be to it to have those windows there. I cannot see it myself. I just cannot see it myself. But I think it should be tested in VCAT, and if they can convince VCAT, then that's fine. But I think our interest is that we can test it. So I strongly support this amendment. We put the motion for this for Councillor Bond's proposed amendment, moved amendment. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The motion's carried. Okay, now we have...
Could I just ask a quick clarifying question? Would officers mind scrolling down to condition 45 again? Good, good. Sorry, I wasn't clear whether 45 was in there.
I think Councillor Crawford's original motion included 45, didn't it? Yes. Now we have a motion in front of us which is essentially the officer's recommendation the alternative recommendation as proposed by Councillor Crawford, with the additional deletion of condition 1B. What are we up to? We're back to the substantive motion. We've had it moved and seconded, and now we're just asking councillors to speak for or against it. Unless they have further amendments. Anyway, Councillor Simic wants to speak.
Mr. Chairperson, I'd like to move an amendment, if I can.
You can if you can
And
find a
that's
seconder.
for 1A to remain as part of the conditions.
Point of order, isn't that substantial? So perhaps a better procedure would be to foreshadow if the motion failed that an alternate motion might be put.
Yes, I'd like to get some advice. Can you unamend an amendment? The amendment is made.
Mr. Chairperson, if I can just ask for other councillors not to interject.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. We have an alternative motion which has been moved. It's before us at the moment with everything...
Sorry, can I just clarify? And forgive me if I got this wrong because my brain's slow and I'm not moving correctly. We haven't passed the motion we're talking about already has... We haven't voted on Louise's amended motion. Therefore, the clause that Councillor Simic is seeking to take out is still in the motion. So surely we have to vote on the amended motion before we would consider taking out a clause that's already in the motion, substantive motion.
I think...
But we haven't made the decision on the amended motion.
Yeah.
So I can clarify.
Chairperson.
Councillor Crawford's motion was not an
I think
amendment.
the chair should clarify.
Okay.
I think I'm about to say the same thing. Councillor Crawford moved a motion. It happened to be an alternative motion to what the officer's recommendation was, but it was put plain and simple by Councillor Crawford. She read out the bits that differed from the officer's recommendation. So we have a plain and simple motion there. We have now amended it and voted on that, so it includes the deletion of clause 1B. So that's what we're sitting there now. Now, Councillor Simic can move an amendment to that original motion, which she is about to explain what it is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. So the amendment to Councillor Crawford's recommendation, the alternate recommendation, is for us to strike out, or to leave in 1A, as it's written on the screen. So it would include, so it's actually not currently in the recommendation because the recommendation didn't include it. So what we're seeing on the screen is slightly misleading, so I understand why councillors are confused. But I'd like to include, as part of the recommendation, the 1A of the officer's recommendation, which says level 5 deleted to create a 6-storey building.
Okay, do you have a seconder? I think the motion lapses. Oh, I thought you were just pointing. No, I didn't see you, I'm sorry. Councillor Baxter seconds.
Mr. Chairperson, I think that it's important for us to take into consideration the community's point of view on this application matter as well. I know that there's been, throughout this process, continued community consultation discussion. I attended a planning consultation, which applicant and also members of the public attended. I believe that the reasons set out in the report, which have led to the officers originally recommending the inclusion of this clause, are sound. I won't go over them again. And I think it's important that we get the height of the building right. And I think that the officer's original recommendation did get us to that point. So I would really strongly put to councillors to leave that as part of the suite of conditions on this planning matter.
Councillor Baxter. Any other councillor want to make a comment on this? I will then. Myself. I would speak against this amendment because I think for the overall interest of the city that this building will be a better building in a number of significant ways by not deleting that floor. I think the detriments of doing that are minor. I think the officer's recommendation to delete it is a valid and logical planning decision. When you look at the city in terms of townscaping it in a general sort of way of grading down from tall to shorter buildings, in a general principle sort of way, I can understand exactly why it was put in. But I think that there are exceptional circumstances on this particular site. I think the buildings. There's two reasons why the building would be improved with three reasons. One is that it's just going to be a more commodious building for more employment, more work, more production and what have you. That's a sort of a given. There's one at the townscape level, which is this a place where a taller building would be better or worse? If it was a really ordinary, not particularly pleasant or beautiful or sightly building, obviously the bigger it is, the worse it's going to be for the city. In this case, it's a building which I think has exceptional architectural qualities, and it will be better to be left in the way it is designed in its proportion and as a whole package the way it's designed. It's rare, I think, that we have the opportunity to make those sorts of decisions, to actually support something of particular beauty and proportion when we can, because quite often we are constrained by planning regulation. On this site in particular, it's really quite important, I think, because it's a unique site. It's an extraordinary site. It's a thin, narrow site. It makes the building an extraordinary building just by the constraints of its own site. It's on a very prominent site, so it has a sort of a landmark quality. It has a sort of a position which is directly across City Road from it. Is a building which is 8 stories. Is an area which with I think it's a DDO which is 8 stories. So it still matches that. It makes a sort of a special sort of city gateway there, both turning into the city of Port Phillip and going along City Road. It has the capacity to be a very, very special and remarkable and pleasurable building for generations to come in this place. And I think taking a little bit of height out of it is an arbitrary, not an arbitrary, but it's not an important enough thing to, it's not supporting important enough benefits to do to actually diminish the actual architectural positives of this building. So I think there are two reasons. One is the actual building itself will be a better building, and in this particular situation, I think a taller building will be a better outcome as long as it's a great building, and I think this is going to be a great building. So I just think it's I just don't think it's the best planning decision, even though I understand it's a logical planning decision. I think overall, for the city, it's a better decision to leave it in. Any other speakers? We'll put this amendment. Councillor Symmetry would like to close? Well, you never know these days, because now we're sort of thinking we might be doing that now. Okay, we'll put the to a vote. The amendment to a vote. All those in favour? 2. All those against? Are we abstaining now? Are we allowed?
Well, just vote on it. Vote this down. We can get on with it.
1, 2, 3, 4. All right, that's been voted down. Okay, the motion we have before us now consists of Councillor Crawford's original motion plus the amendment, which is the deletion of 1.b, and that's where we are at the moment. And I think the movers of that have spoken, the seconder of that has spoken, and now it's up to any other councillors to speak for and against it, and the original mover to close. Any? Councillor Pearl.
Thanks, Councillor Brand. I think the design of your building is very nice, and I particularly like the materials that you're using and the thought and effort that's gone into it. As I said at the consultation, I'm the reason you're here this evening because I called this in. I didn't think the original proposal was going to work on this site given the density that was proposed on the size of the site for the use in terms of apartments. I didn't think that was appropriate at that height, at 10 stories. And the daytime, nighttime usage of it, a more commercial use which has been proposed, will have a lot less nighttime use in terms of lights on that boundary showing what's inside the building. It will be used at nighttime, but it won't be used inhabited that time of night. So I think this is a much better use. The overall height at 7 stories is a little high probably, but I'm fine to move on that. That was what I was willing to accept at the consultation. There's 5 stories across the road, 5 stories exactly next door, so it's slightly higher, and then 8 stories across the road, as Councillor Brand said. So net, I think that works out. Again, it's my fault we're here this evening, but I hope the council position is clearer and fulfilled by it coming to this meeting here this evening as we go to the next stage through VCAT. But I hope it is constructed, and I hope it's built as planned instead of flipped around and coming back to us. But we shall see what happens. But thanks for coming this evening.
Councillor Simic.
Just very briefly, so I can explain my decision tonight, and I'd like to echo some of those comments about the overall design and what you're working towards, the materials you're using, and the effort you've gone through to make sure that you've consulted broadly on this. I won't be supporting the application on the basis of 1A from the officer's recommendation not being included as part of the recommendations. I don't think that the 7 stories quite gets that right limit that's in the community's benefit. So with that in mind, I won't be supporting the application on that basis, but I do wish you, I think you will get the majority support from councillors tonight. I think that this will go ahead, and on that basis I do wish you the best of luck, and I do really hope and look forward to seeing continued engagement with the community to make sure that we get the best possible outcomes on this site, and that we do get this building built overall. So thank you.
Any other councillors? Councillor Bond.
Yeah, I'd say this is probably one of the better looking buildings that's ever come before us. We see a lot of rubbish come through here that we look at and think, I don't hope that doesn't ever get built, but this is one of those. I think it's a very good looking building. I know there's no such thing as beauty in the planning scheme, but if there was, this would meet the requirements, and I really hope this gets built in this location. Thank you.
Anyone else? I'll make a few remarks myself. As Councillor Bond says, there's no such thing as beauty in the planning scheme, but there is architectural excellence which peppers our planning scheme everywhere, and it's very hard to know how to grasp that. And I think this is an opportunity that we can actually demonstrate that we're able to grasp that in exceptional circumstances, in a circumstance that we are actually, in planning regulatory terms, relatively speaking, unconstrained. There is not actually a DDO on this site. The limitations are at our discretion. It's a judgment call. I think planners made a perfectly sane judgment on the height of it. I just think that we can make a better judgment by allowing and encouraging a piece of excellent architecture. That's where I think we stand. I think the deal is that giving that extra floor, not only I think design-wise makes it a better design, it also gives the developer more discretion to make sure that the building is carried out absolutely as we have had it presented to us, as advertised, with the detailing, with the materials, with the qualities. There should be no excuse for diminishing them, cutting back on them as the process goes through. And I do note that almost every clause in this proposed what will become the permit is to council satisfaction, and I would implore our council officers as they trawl through the application as it comes in its amended forms to ensure that they really do impose a very high degree of satisfaction, because I think there's every opportunity for this building to be carried out at a very high level. So that's, I think, is a sort of an implicit deal in this way that we've crafted this motion. I think I'll leave it at that. I've got lots that I could say about the architecture. I think there's some really. There's one thing I did want to say. In Amsterdam, there's a set of buildings, housing buildings, which were built about a century ago, all through in various parts of Holland, which are very well known. I won't go into the details, but it's a series of buildings which have absolutely brilliant brickwork. They're very, very public-spirited buildings. I feel sure that the architects know of these particular buildings, and have channeled a real sense of public-spirited brickwork into our municipality. It sits beautifully beside the little brick buttresses and rampants of the railway bridge. It sits really well in our industrial area. There's so many things that this building can do, and I think will do, that'll bring pleasure and a sense of identity and a sense of place to the city in this part. I really, really mourn the loss of the little building next to it, not because the building itself was that great, but that has that little splay at York Street where there's a piece of symmetry there which is almost unprecedented anywhere, and I'm sorry that that's going to get lost. This building, the one it's replacing, it's no loss at all to be replacing it. It's the perfect position for an unusual and unique building, and I commend the proponents for coming up with it, and I commend council for voting for it. Thank you.
We haven't voted. No, we did vote for it. Was that your closing statement?
That's the closing statement.
Wow.
All right.
I forgot we actually voted. We haven't voted for it.
We'll call for the vote.
Oh.
All right. Sorry, wake up. Time to vote.
Me wake up? You just said we'd voted for it.
Oh. I need to wake up. Okay, that was a misstatement. Would Louise like to close?
All those in favour?
All those in favour? All those against? Yes, I have to excuse myself from that terrible mistake. Motion is carried. Thank you very much. That item is done. We have one more item. (6.3) Statutory Planning Delegated Decisions, May 2019.
Happy to move.
Do I have
Happy to second.
No extended comments or questions to officers or anything? Okay. Who moved? Councillor Gross moved. Seconded Councillor Pearl. Do you want to speak? Do you want to speak? Do you want to close? We'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? Can't count them. There are none. So that's passed unanimously, and thank you very much. I can now call this. Pardon? What do you? Oh, we've got some. Yes, other little bits and pieces. Okay, a couple of other items. Item 7, urgent business. Are there any items of urgent business? Item 8, confidential matters. We have no confidential items tonight. There being no further business, I declare the meeting closed.